Uncle Gnomes. Well, I just finished the publishing the last of the four sovereigns, the four elemental sovereigns. So I figured we could talk a little bit about the deities, the gods, and cosmology of Anacra. Go over that just a little bit to explain what exactly is a god in this world. Yeah, look, there's a god for everything. So I want to talk a little bit about divine taxonomy. Basically, breaking down the different categories of divine beings. What is the nature of divinity? There is basically, it's sort of a pantheistic or animistic setting where every river has a spirit or god, every mountain or forest. There isn't one main wolf god. There's tons and tons of wolf spirits and wolf deities out there. Every single culture, the farther you travel, the more different, unfamiliar deities you're going to encounter. A lot of places are very much known for their gods. What god do they worship? Well, we worship the god of this place where we live because they have the most control over our lives. As a consequence, most entities that you would call a god can actually be killed. They can be defeated in some way. Do they permanently die? Do they just sort of merge back with the cosmos? It varies case by case. All right. So, I want to talk about the elemental sovereigns, their offspring, the nature of divinity, and we do. Great. Yeah, you can pull up the World Anvil site, which has a cheat sheet of all the lore that has been published so far there. And you are now able to go up and look up the four elemental sovereigns. Vindur, who's the sovereign of air, Arakura, the sovereign of earth, Sin, the sovereign of fire, and Liban, the sovereign of water. And the sovereigns are the embodiments of the elements themselves. They're not like, oh, I'm the god of earth, I'm the god of fire. They are earth, fire, air, and water. They are those things, given will, given sentience, given personalities. A lot of their stories and the way that they've interacted with the people of Anacra, it's very larger than life. They have egos, they have moods, they have things they're fond of and things they hate. They do things out of spite or compassion. They are sort of the cosmic keystones responsible for maintaining and protecting the world, but they aren't unimaginable figures. When they're manifested on the world, let me adjust that. They do have personalities. And I do think, well, each of them sort of draws from a different mythos more than others. If you imagine the Norse gods, the Greek gods, and their larger than life personalities, I think you're going to be on the right step. The sovereigns were the first new minds to exist in Anacra. When Anacra was first created, it is the latest world in a long cycle of worlds. This cycle of birth, life, death, and renewal defines all of creation. And so each world is born from the ashes of the last. And I'm not going to say if anybody knows how many worlds there have been before Anacra. It's one of those things that's best left at least appearing to be an infinite cycle. And it's certainly not something that anybody you talk to in Anacra would know with certainty. They might have opinions that they would share with you. They might have theories that they share with you, but it's not something that you can say, oh, well, this sovereign source of truth has said X, Y, and Z. What is known is that there was a world before, and it's referred to as the world before. Are the elements personified? Are they omnipotent in any way? Or is it only in their domains? They are not omnipotent. Nothing in Anacra is omnipotent. There are references to the nameless god, which was the first presence at the dawn, but if that entity is omnipotent, it has failed to demonstrate that in any meaningful way. It's definitely done things no one else has done, but again, it's hard to measure omnipotence. What the sovereigns are, though, is a while back, my buddy Ninja Man Matt and I, he's sort of my co-creator on the world, we did a power ranking for Anacra. sort of in broad brackets, right? It wasn't this is the most powerful creature, and then this guy could beat this guy in a fight, and if this guy had Thor's hammer, he could beat this guy in a fight. It was more like there's classes of entities, and the sovereigns are the highest class of entity out there, or at least they're in that highest bracket. So they are outrageously strong, outrageously powerful. They can exert their will over the elements because they are the elements. They are a sentience manifesting from those four elements. So they have almost complete control. It's usually localized. For example, Sin, the Sovereign of Flame, has never done something like extinguish every single fire across the entire world. That's not a thing anyone's ever experienced. Sin has turned an entire desert into glass. Just a huge... Yes, they are super powerful. And Tiberius... So, this got a little bit lost in the question, by the way, for chat is they're super powerful and Tiberius stole a horse from one of them. So this got a little bit lost in translation during the game. If for those of you who haven't watched One Last Ride yet, you should. It was hilarious. But Tiberius Wanderstave, the famous sorcerer, could whistle a song that would summon a horse that everybody says belonged to Vindur, the sovereign of the skies, the air sovereign. The truth of the matter is that the horse did not belong to Vindur. The horse belonged to one of Vindur's children. Vindur's children are the Four Winds. One of Vindur's titles is Four Wind Father. And so this is actually going to tie back into something else I was going to say. If the sovereigns were the first minds to emerge in Anacra, when the world before crashed, basically, and a new world emerged, one of the first things in that first world were the elements. They came into existence. As they came into existence so that there was stuff instead of there not being stuff, the sovereigns woke up. Like, oh, there's fire, therefore sin awakened. Just, oh, I'm here now, I'm fire. So their consciousness just sort of emerged as Anacra was born in the moment of creation. So the sovereigns were the first, they embody the elements, then they have direct offspring, who are some of the next order of entity. The direct creation or child of a sovereign is called a titan. So if the sovereigns are the strongest natural deities or gods in the world, the titans are the next order. And the Four Winds, the children of Vindur, are titans. They are direct children of Vindur. So they're not as strong as the sovereigns, but they're still quake in your boots. Mortals should not screw with them, etc., etc. Anyone who goes toe-to-toe with the Titan is a huge deal. I don't remember the exact circumstances under which Tiberius Wanderstave got Sudurvind, the horse of the South Wind, but I believe it wasn't by direct force. It was by being terribly clever. Tiberius basically outsmarted the South Wind and stole the horse. Was there a lot of magical mojo to back that up? Yeah, absolutely. Tiberius was a very, very powerful wild mage. But it was also wit and charm and lying and being sleazy. Basically stole the horse out from under him. Exactly. So if you've got the four sovereign, you've got the nameless god who does not show up very often in the mythos. One of the only things the nameless god did was to open the gates of the Silent City, which Tiberius also visited, which we might talk about in a moment. For now, we're doing, again, divine classifications. So you have the four sovereigns, and then you have titans. And I don't have a full list of all the titans yet, partially because every time I'm like, I don't have a god for X, Y, and Z, you're like, well, that's probably a titan. That's such a primal force that it ought to be a titan. I do know of three major titans, though. First up, we have Zalar, the sun god, often associated with the phoenix. He's called the Sun Rider, a god of renewal, of destruction and creation. Everything that a phoenix usually embodies. Life-giving, and also the desert light that chokes out life. So Zalar is the Sun Rider. Zalar is not the sun, but sort of drives it like a chariot, sort of an Apollo figure, rides the sun. And the Zalorian faith is very big. If this, okay, so these are the northern kingdoms. This is where the Quest for the Book of Dawn took place, and this is in Anacra, where One Last Ride took place. Brontha, which is a sort of a chaparral Mediterranean desert style land, Brontha is ruled by the Solar Empire, which is dedicated to Zalar. They're very fervent, they're very zealous, and a lot of that comes from the fact that for at least 400, 500 years, I can pull the timeline, demonic empires ruled over the land. And this is going to take us back to the sovereigns in a moment, why that was allowed to happen. And in that time of crisis, where most of the great civilizations were ruled by fiends or ruled by people who served fiends, who had made blood pacts and sacrifices, just a time of great civilization development, but at a price of terrible, terrible cruelty. And during that time, the people of Brontha, in order to resist being taken over essentially by the demonic Imperiums, they turned to the worship of Zalar, the sun god. So they fought tooth and nail in the desert to resist being conquered by people who worshipped the Infernals. And they succeeded. They were able to maintain their independence and build up one of the only... During the demonic Imperium, there's all these little pockets, these sanctuaries that have to have something very special about them in order to resist being conquered by the local demon-worshipping warlord or corrupt empire bureaucrat, etc. So we've got Zalar is a Titan. Then we have Ramius. We talked a lot about Ramius. Ramius is the son of Anacra, the Earth Titan. And before one of the biggest, most defining events in all of Anacra, Ramius's job was to dip. He had this silver ladle. He was like a cupbearer to the gods. He had this silver ladle, and every time a new creature was born, he would dip his ladle into the wells of blood, the source of all life blood, and he would scoop up some blood and pour it into their veins, and that would infuse them with life. So he had this important job. He was associated kind of with fertility, but more with like vibrant life force, with blood, and not a god of child. Well, yeah, he would be kind of associated with childbirth. He had this very primal earth deity role. And then he switched jobs, and he became the god of death. And we will explain why that happened in a moment. Ramius is very widely worshipped throughout the Northern Kingdoms, throughout Amonkharach. We met Arya, who was a priestess of Ramius, in Amonkharach during One Last Ride. The faith of Ramius is very widespread because Ramius had... It's not a phase, Mom! Ramius had a lot to do with breaking up the state of affairs in which these demonic empires ruled most of the world. The third Titan, the third major named Titan, is Raelta. And she is the daughter of Liban, the sovereign of the seas, and Vindur, the sovereign of the skies. And she is a patron of stars. She is not the creator of... I keep going back and forth on this. I am inclined to say that she is not the creator of the stars, but she did make more of them. Yes, she's a Titan. She's the offspring of air and water. The sovereigns, they can take sort of whatever shape they want. They often have guises or shapes that they most enjoy, that they prefer. For example, Sin, the sovereign of fire, usually appears as this powerful, metallic, flame-wreathed man. Vindur very much likes the classic sky god look. Big flowing beard, tall, toga, or like Norse getup, but very much, flowing hair, very much what you would imagine when you see pictures of God, or Zeus, or Odin. Liban, being the sovereign of water, refuses to be pinned down, prefers to change shape constantly, and defies all sort of categorization. And then Anacra mostly preferred a female form, walked the entire land, made of earth and soil, with hair of growing green leaves and that sort of thing, but also had a scarier metal and gem-eyed form that she could take on when she needed to kick somebody's ass. But yes, Raelta is the daughter of Vindur and Liban. It's a very important figure for reasons that haven't really come up during the main campaign yet, but she is the the queen of stars, the lighter of new stars, the patron of stars. And in Anacra, the stars are celestials. So they're angels. And they stay at the edge of the firmament, at the very edge of creation, standing watch over the infinite void beyond Anacra, from which multiple bad things have come in the past, which is why it's a very important job. So when you have an Azamar running around, they are descended from literal stars. And that includes Uber's character in the first campaign, Aaron Vol, who's an Azamar who didn't really know it and started manifesting these abilities in the middle of the campaign. He's descended from an actual star at some point. Shape of Water joke? Yeah, absolutely. So you've got 4 sovereigns and an undetermined number of titans, sort of 3 major ones that have been named so far, but there's definitely room for more. Like if I go through and I say, we don't really have a god of this yet, and that doesn't really seem like something that should be localized, that should be something on a larger scale, we can just add a new titan, because a titan can be a child, an actual offspring of a sovereign, or it can sort of be like a first creation, like a direct creation. So aside from their children, the titans, the sovereigns also created giants, dwarves, elementals, and genies. They did this to help them shape the earth, which I am at least somewhat convinced is entirely ripped off from Azeroth, but it makes sense. So the giants, like the fire giants and the stone giants and the storm giants, they were each given the heavy lifting and dominion over one part of the world or another. And then the dwarves are responsible for doing the fine details. And the ancestral dwarves, in Anacra, we've introduced Alaka, the river dwarf, before, which is sort of your traditional dwarves don't really like water very much. In Anacra, dwarves, the ancestor dwarves, were made from the elements. So there's a dwarf of living water currents for sinews with a body of coral. I believe they're the Gelmir. You've got the dwarves who are made of coals and flame with beards of actual living fire. I'd have to look it up. They all have fancy names. Yeah, like elemental gnomes, except not gnomes. They're dwarves because gnomes are terrible. You've got the Grafa, who are made of snow and ice. They're the wind dwarves. They dwell in the clouds. And then you've got the original earth dwarves, who were actually made of rock and stone and all that. And what happened was, as time went on, they turned in each of these ancestral dwarf species gave rise to 2 mortal types of dwarves. So you've got your traditional hill and mountain dwarves who descended from earth dwarves, but then the river dwarves and did I really just call them sea dwarves? I probably did. They're sailors and they can talk to water and such. And then you've got ember dwarves who are very secretive. They collect knowledge and lore. And desert dwarves who are nomads who spread tales across the sands. So there's a lot more variety to the dwarven kind, but the long and the short of it is they were all created, their ancestors were created by the sovereigns to help them shape the world. Alright, so we're talking about the taxonomy of the divines. We've got the 4 sovereigns. And the thing about the sovereigns is that if you travel from Iman Karak to Galadron and anywhere else that you go, they're going to have very different local religions. They might worship some ancestral heroes as gods. Their local geographic features will have deities. There might be a local deer spirit that they worship. They could have saints who have lived lives of great virtue, who they offer prayers to. They could have local warrior gods. They might have some local fae, powerful fae or spirits they pay homage to. You're going to get very, very different religions from region to region. But the one thing everyone can agree on, every single culture has in common, is the sovereigns. It's like the fact that most major world religions, even if it's just the old ones in our world, they have a sky deity of some kind. On this divine hierarchy, where do these mortal worshipped gods fall? Are they at the very bottom? No, they're not at the very bottom. It very much depends on the person. It depends entirely on the person. because ancestor worship could just be my grandfather, right? You could just pray to your grandfather for help, and your grandfather would hear your prayers. They may not be able to cause an earthquake or any huge sign of divine power, but they would be able to do, something in order to aid you. So you tend to get like collective ancestor worship where you pray to all of your ancestors, and if you've got enough ancestors and they've been venerating them, it goes far enough back, then there's some pretty significant divine power there, even if no one ancestor is strong enough. Where you get really powerful ascended mortals basically is where something special happens. At the time of the Casters and Castles campaign, there is a path to godhood that has been laid out, but has not yet come to fruition. And that path is pretty significant, and it leads to, there's essentially, the way that prophecy works in Anacra, a prophecy is not saying this is what will happen. A prophecy is more a recipe for something to happen. Wanderstave is trying, though. So, fun fact. Wanderstave was powerful enough in life. If he developed a proper cult, he could have probably become some sort of deity. And given the way that he went out at the center of a magical nuke, his spirit could still be somewhere out there doing stuff. Could a massive, prestigious ancestry be a warlock patron? Absolutely. Absolutely. A sufficiently, either enough ancestors, like this whole, in order for your ancestors to give you, like, sponsor a warlock, you would have to come from somebody who, like, my ancestors prayed to their ancestors. You'd have to have a long tradition there to sort of build up the spiritual momentum. Or you'd have to have some really badass ancestors. Now for the Book of Dawn. So, Dawn magic. Let's talk a little bit about Dawn magic. I know we're all over the place, but yeah, like a sorcerer, somebody who is a sufficiently powerful sorcerer might be able, and if they do enough great deeds and stuff, the recipe could be there. So, Dawn magic. Going back to when the sovereigns woke up, they're just, oh, hey, there's a world here, and we exist. We sort of, our substance forms this world. At that time, we talk a lot about the dawn and the era of dawn, before there were 4 kingdoms. And essentially, Anacra at the time was just this mass of elements and leftover creative energy from the world before. And it reacted to will and imagination. So if you were in this world, the Dawn world, and you had a big enough imagination and a strong enough will, you could just change the world around you. Everybody had godlike powers. Wishes came true. Where one person's will and another person's will came into conflict, things would happen. But essentially, Dawn magic is just the magic of this unlimited creative potential. And it's mostly gone now, and the reason it's gone is because that creative potential was given shape and purpose and formed into the 4 kingdoms. So the Dawn world of unlimited potential ended, and the 4 kingdoms that have more rules and laws were created from it. But there's leftover bits and pieces of that, just, hey, I want this to be this way magic lying around. That is Dawn magic. Dawn magic, if you get enough of it, it has almost no limits to what it can do in terms of its flexibility. Maybe you can get whatever you want in a very small localized area, or maybe if you know how to like find enough strands and pieces of it, you can do something major. I think anytime somebody casts Wish, the spell Wish, they're invoking Dawn magic of some kind. So, Immortal, depending on the properties of the Book of Dawn, if the Book of Dawn, say, gives instructions on how to get a whole lot of Dawn magic in one place, that could absolutely cause the apotheosis of Immortal and ascend them to godhood. I want to say a level 20 character in some way is a god. Not a huge god, not like an incredibly powerful one, but there isn't like this, oh, I have detected you are a god, and you are not a god. It's a god is just a title that people in Anacra associate with anybody who has a certain level of divine power. And that can go up like a celestial, just a small celestial, a weak celestial, could logically be called a god. It's more like calling someone divine, right? It's less that, oh, you congratulations, here's your certificate of godhood, and more that you have divine power. You have this power to declare your will and have it be, or you have this I am fire, or I am magic, or I am honor. You start to embody something. And a level 20 character has already pushed into that threshold, because again, it's not a clear-cut threshold, it's more of a scale. So Tiberius was in some ways a god. If he had enough kids who spread his word far and wide enough, he could become even more of a god. If he had somehow eaten the wild heart instead of exploding it, that could have supercharged him into godhood. There are a lot of possibilities there. All right. So we have the sovereigns and the titans, and there's Titan. You can be a very, very strong Titan. You can be kind of a weaker Titan, but any Titan is going to be, very, very heavy weight class, essentially. And then as you go below Titans, you start to have things like archdevils, archdemons, archfey, things with, you might say, a challenge rating of the 16 to 20s. It's that, we had a term for this at some point, an official term. But basically, you're a badass, right? You might be a very, very lesser god. You might be a super high-level mortal, but that's sort of that threshold. And again, like I said, after that, it gets very, very blurry. You could have a god of one river who has a lot of power in that river and nowhere else whatsoever. So things do get very, very blurry at that point. Going back to the sovereigns, I recently published the article on Anacra, who, oh, you know what? I never pinged Discord. I think it's because we're just sort of hanging out instead of running a game. Casters and castles. Burnt. Send it. There we go. All right, cool. What up? How's it going, man? Just remember to ping Discord. So, casters, castles, casters, and casuals. I like it. I like it. We're gonna have to take that from now on. If an ideal would gain enough power, so would it give birth to a deity? It could. It could. It may not. It would kind of. I think it would be a very unusual sort of mind. So an ideal might be honor, for example. I just discovered a miniatures company in the EU that does steampunk dwarves. I'm obsessed now. Post it in the Discord. We'll take a look at it. So let's say honor, right? Warriors who espouse honor. I think the most likely thing that would happen, just in the specific case of honor, is that an exemplar of the ideals of honor would sort of become the face for that new deity. So in a culture that lionizes warrior chivalry, like a code of warrior chivalry, what would happen is that a priest of that tradition would be able to call on the knights of old, or the warriors of old, those who were exemplars of those ideals, and they would appear. Now, the question would be, is that actually them? Or is that just a manifestation of warrior honor that has taken on that guise? And I think in most cases it would be somewhere in between. We have a character like this in another campaign I ran in Anacra years and years ago, who died a noble death. And we always joke, we always refer to him as a blue Jedi. But the idea is that's not just Minoru, the character Minoru. It's not just him running around being like, I'm a blue Jedi now. It's partially him, but he's also merged with this larger cosmic concept, which has caused some loss of his identity and his self. It's hard to draw the line of where this larger ideal stops and Minoru begins, and in fact, it may be a meaningless distinction now. There's also, it's funny, again, a lot of my world building takes place well after the current era of the world. I'm trying to think of some examples of ideals that have, because later on in history you get more of these philosophies and the dream world. I have a character much later in the timeline who goes through a similar apotheosis with the dream world. So the dream world, I've said this on stream I believe before, the world before died, and what was left over of it became Anacra. It died and was reborn from the ashes. And the leftover omniscience, the omnipotent power of the gods of the old world became sort of the dawn, the power of dawn, this power of unlimited creative potential. And their leftover sentience, their omniscience, became the dream world. So it's full of ideas and thoughts, some of which come from your own head, some of which just come from elsewhere. And I think that in order for a dream deity to emerge, it would take some very specific circumstances, because dream is already, it's already the sort of thing that doesn't need a mind and doesn't need an avatar to talk to you. Now, anytime that you interacted with the dream world, it would probably take some dream shape of somebody you knew or recognized. But for the most part, you'd have to have a very specific culture to turn that into a deity of some kind. I'm trying to think of how that would work. I'm sure it could work. I think it's more likely that if you had a faith that focused on inner contemplation, like a form of meditation that immerses you into the dream world, then elements of that way of belief would manifest themselves in dream or through dream energy. But I'd have to think about it more, I think. Yeah. All right. So we have the Dawn world, the very first era, where everything's made up. There are elements, there is physical stuff, but it's all changeable by whatever powerful mind dwells there. And the Infernals, an Infernal in Anacra is a title for a powerful fiend that originates beyond Anacra itself. So you've got the world of Anacra, and then outside of that you have the Hungry Dark. The Void, the Great Beyond, whatever you want to call it. It's basically just the rest of the multiverse cosmos that is left to the imagination or needs of the Dungeon Master. And the Infernals arrived from beyond there. They basically saw this world of limitless potential where willpower could just change everything, shape the world to your desires. And they're like, yeah, I want that. So a bunch of them arrived. And it was this coalition of all these different powerful fiends. So if you were running a campaign in Anacra and you wanted to use one of the traditional D&D big bads like Orcus or Demogorgon or Zariel, Asmodeus, any of them, Anacra doesn't have the traditional D&D cosmology, the Nine Hells, the Abyss, etc. But you could still include any of those characters you want. You would just say, oh yeah, they totally were part of the Infernal incursion during the Dawn era. They came along board. I want them here. They came along board. So you can easily add any sort of demon or devil nasty that you want. But there are a few Infernals who are specific to Anacra, and the one that we talk about the most is Uzul the Destroyer, because he was their general, he was their leader, he coordinated their efforts. He coordinated a group of entities that are very much not interested in collaboration. So they invade, and the Sovereigns are ineffectual. They just sort of say, well, the Sovereigns didn't really have an agenda in the beginning. They were content to exist, and all these new minds and entities appeared in the Dawn world. The proto-elves and proto-fae and other creatures popped up and started making cool stuff in the Dawn world. And the Sovereigns were like, hey, stuff is being made. The world exists instead of not existing. That's all we need. And the Infernals arrive, and they start basically colonizing the Dawn world. They seize it for themselves. They take it. They shape it into whatever they want. They eat parts of it. They take, if there's some spirit that's building cool stuff, they grab them and enslave them, prevent them from exercising their free will, partially out of desire for more, partially out of just cruelty. Hey, look, I'm all powerful here. This is great. And the sovereigns didn't do much of anything to stop them because they were still of the mind that it doesn't matter what shape reality takes. If it's beautiful or ugly, that's all in the eye of the beholder. We don't care. Reality exists instead of not existing. That's fine by us. Those are our criteria. Until the Infernals destroyed the city of Luminius, the city of light, which is the legendary lost paradise of Anacra. And it's sort of impossible to describe because during the Dawn Era, it was possible to do things like build a tower out of song or light or all these sorts of things. And Luminius was this bastion of defense against the Infernals. As they spread and took over, the defenders of Luminius, the entities that dwelled there, were able to resist. And that is another long story for another time. Essentially, there was a love story at the heart of Luminius between Barash and Lotne, and their union was something that the Infernals could not overcome. Because this was a world where ideals manifested themselves into reality. So the Infernals were... Urbane, thank you for the sub. Glad to have you with. Thanks for sticking around and chatting. So Luminius, the city of light with its powerful defenders, Barash and Lotne, who found each other in the middle of a war crisis, and their bond was the anchor upon which the defense of Luminius held. And the Infernals attacked and attacked and failed and failed and failed until the coalition of all the different fiends started to break down. The moment things weren't going their way, they started to turn on Uzul, to doubt his leadership, to plot against him, to take over from him. When your entire motivation is selfishness and conquest, it's pretty easy to do that as soon as you stop getting the results you want. So the Infernals began to fail, and the Sovereigns still weren't really doing anything. Because again, they exist at the time, their entire morality, the world before, had been destroyed. And only by a miracle did the cycle continue and a new world appear. So the Sovereigns, their only concern was, whatever the shape of the world, just let it keep being. So Brash and Lotne, I'm going to grab a glass of water. And then I'll be right back. 30 seconds. Time me, chat. Did I make it back in time? Alright, so, and to clarify a point, we're talking about Luminius, the City of Light, the lost paradise of the Dawn Era, the first era of Anacra, when wishes came true and impossible things happened all the time. And the beings that dwelt in this time, they're sort of the ancestors of elves and fae, and they could make whatever bodies they wanted for themselves from the stuff of dawn. They were limitless, and the feats of power and heroism they could enact were similarly limitless. So Uzul, the Destroyer, this Lord of Conquest, the Sovereigns came to be at the start of this new cycle in the Dawn Era, and they are aware of the world before. Their knowledge of the world before is incredibly limited. They were not sentient or conscious during the world before. They were born as part of the process of the world being reborn. They have no memory of what happened before. They are aware of its existence. I would say your average. Whoop. That should be better. How's that, chat? Is that good? I literally just moved it away. The whole existence, excellent, great. The whole existence of the world before is something that is not common knowledge. I'd say your average highly educated sage is aware at least of theories of a world before. Is probably very familiar and confident talking about it, but actually describing anything, any of the gods of that world, any of the, like, there's no record whatsoever of what happened before. Thank you for the sub. Thank you for the support. We are working on some emotes. We have a new artist who's working on them. Fingers crossed. So the world before, it's one of those things that the wisest of the wise know about, but they know very little about it. But there is one thing left over from the world before, which is how the story of Luminius ends. And it's directly tied to the adventures of Tiberius Wanderstave. Uzul is losing his coalition of fiends and infernals. And he gets desperate. The misadventures, yes. He gets desperate and he turns to an entity that they called the Scorpion. Another infernal, but one so hateful and miserable that none of the other infernals want to deal with it. It came along with them from the Hungry Dark, but it mostly dwells alone. Not even these other paragons of corruption, chaos, and evil want to deal with the Scorpion. Its hatred and malice is legendary. So, like, the denizens know to theorize the world before, while the sovereigns know absolutely that it existed. Yes, there are some scholars who are positive that it exists because of the Silent City, which again we're going to get to. And feel free to keep questions coming, by the way. I know I'm sort of monologuing here, but every time I come to a pause, I will answer questions in chat. Uzul goes to the Scorpion and asks for help. And at some point, I will do the full write-up of this. I've done a couple versions in the past that need some reworks. And the Scorpion hatches a plan that separates Barash and Lotne, runs them through an unbelievable amount of wartime trauma, leads them to believe that the other is dead, and essentially breaks their bond. And it ends with the Scorpion tricking them into one of them to their death. And he has Barash's soul in his hands, in his clutches, and he reveals all of this to Lotne, Barash's lover, at the very end, just as the final sting. The final, by the way, you abandoned your city, you let it fall. Luminius, like, as soon as they split up and Lotne started going after the Scorpion for revenge, Uzul's legions returned. It was a trap, and they devour this legendary lost paradise. And after consuming its light and power, they have grown so vast and so multiple that they are just starting to eat the rest of the Dawn world and bring it completely under their control. Its light is beginning to fade as they consume it. And the Sovereigns are watching all of this, and they waited so long to interfere that they are now powerless. The Infernals have grown so strong by feasting on the magic of the Dawn world that they now eclipse the Sovereigns. And the Sovereigns, even if they wanted to intervene, they couldn't stop it. It's a runaway reaction. The Scorpion goes a step too far, pushes Lotne, who goes into a murderous rage, and all three of them perish. So now, as the fiends are running rampant, the Sovereigns realize we are screwed. all of creation is screwed, and we can't stop it. And that is when the nameless power, who was there before the world, who might be one of the only survivors of the world before, and whose nature is very poorly understood. Again, not omnipotent, but definitely above most of the rules of reality. The nameless power goes to the Silent City, the same Silent City with 7 gates leading up to it that Tiberius Wanderstave visited multiple times in his life. And the nameless power opens all 7 gates. And from beyond the 7th gate, dragons emerge. And these are the dragons of the world before. They were imprisoned for some crime against reality before, and their power is not like anything that the sovereigns or the infernals have seen. And Ashardalon is one of them. Ashardalon was the dragon of the first gate. So these dragons are loosed, and they devastate the infernals. They spread out. Again, you're not going to find these guys in the Monstrous Manual. They are cosmic entities. They lay waste to the fiends. They just go out there. That would be on brand, wouldn't it? If the nameless power was just a reality-bending Tiberius Wanderstave after blasting himself out of the space-time continuum. That would track, actually. So the dragons scourge the world of the fiends, and they drive the infernals into hiding, but all that's left over is this smoldering wreckage. And the sovereigns come together sort of in this disaster, and that is when they split the Dawn world into the 4 kingdoms: the Underworld, the Mortal World, the Otherworld, and the Sky Kingdom. Or Overworld, depending on what you want to call it, if you want to stay on theme. So they split out the Dawn, and these 4 worlds merge together to form the Firmament, which is a protective barrier which will hopefully prevent any further incursions from the Hungry Dark. Infernals and other entities should no longer be able to enter from outside. And that is what starts the sort of normal history of Anacra. The Dawn era is this time of superlatives and impossible things and legendary magic, and then the 4 kingdoms are created and things settle down. It's still a world of fairies and dragons and all sorts of magical nonsense, but it's more recognizable to what we would understand. So the Infernals are obviously pissed. They had this whole world to shape in their image. They had unlimited resources. They were able to, they all have huge egos, and they were able to exercise those egos on reality, and suddenly they lose the ability to shape the world, and they're trapped. They're trapped inside of this bubble, this reality bubble, and they can't get out. So even if they decide, screw this, I'm going home, they can't. They're stuck now. And they're stuck in this world, and now that there are laws and rules of physics and magic and such, the sovereigns are more powerful than them again. They sort of had this power spike as they ate the Dawn world, and that gets taken away from them. So now they're prisoners inside this world, and all they want is to break it up, go back to the way things were when their willpower could shape reality. They could just consume the raw essence of the world of Anacra, grow incredibly powerful, and be gods. And this is where we're going to come back to the most recent article that we posted on World Anvil, which is about Anacra, the Earth Sovereign. After the 4 kingdoms took shape and mortals started sort of appearing as a consequence, they just popped up all over the place, the dwarves began to turn from these elemental shapes into creatures of flesh. The elves went from these shapeless eternal spirits to having to sort of pick what forms they wanted and stick with them. This is where we get the Dawn elves, the Dusk elves, so on and so forth. And Anacra, every single sovereign picks a corner of the earth, basically. So what we have here, and again, this is the place, the eastern continents, where our adventures have taken place so far. We have the continents of Giru and Isatum. And Giru is the continent that Vindur picked. Now, Vindur dwells in the Sky Kingdom, doesn't dwell on the world, but this area is sort of where Vindur's power is greatest, and that's why you've got the 4 winds running around, you've got a lot of cloud giants and frost giants and all that sort. And then down here, Isatum is what Sin, the Sovereign of Fire, picked. over to the west, we have 2 more continents which have not appeared in our adventures so far. Therefore, I haven't shown that map or posted that map. Maybe someday we'll play there. I'm trying to keep things a little more bounded. But essentially, Liban has a continent and Anacra has a continent. And Anacra was fundamental in designing the way that the 4 kingdoms would be shaped. And she had a plan from the very beginning. As soon as they got the Infernals on the back foot, Anacra had a plan. And she started seeding the earth with life. And she never shared her plan with anyone. She was she saw the big picture. She would lay the foundations. She had every single step planned out for thousands and thousands of years. And Uzul hated her for it. He was most afraid of her out of all the sovereigns because of her farsight, her resilience, so on and so forth. So he figured that the sovereigns are the ones who reshaped the world. So they must be the foundations of the firmament that keeps him sealed up and makes the world 4 kingdoms instead of the Dawn world. So if he could just kill them, things would break up naturally. So Liban's continent it's got a lot of rainforests and swamps on it. The thing is, though, Liban was assigned a continent and just said, yeah, that's great. I'm just going to fuck off in the ocean anyways. And Liban cares very little for the affairs of mortals. Vindor's attitude at first was, as long as they show proper respect, they'll be left to live their own lives. Sin loves mortals, obsessed with mortals. Sin and Anacra were the most involved. Sin is a very Promethean figure. He traveled among the different early tribes and cultures of the world, and he taught them fire, and he taught them the wheel. His whole thing, he wants to see civilization flourish. It's a really wet, wild west. Yeah, absolutely. So Sin wanted to bring civilization and culture and see these mortal races flourish. Anacra also wanted to see the mortals flourish, but not from here, I'm going to hold you by the hand and teach you, more of I am going to set up the world so that it supports mortal existence. So Anacra's lands ended up being arranged like gardens and fields and orchards. It was plug and play. If a tribe showed up, there'd be food growing. They'd learn how to do agriculture just by living there because the world was so life-giving and the principles of agriculture and such were already on display. Liban sometimes would get really obsessed with a particular mortal or a particular culture, and then would get bored and fuck off and forget about them. And again, Vindor was always sort of, well, they better show me respect, but as long as they do that, then they should be tough and find their own way in the world. So Uzul decides he's going to kill Anacra. The problem is, he used to be tougher than the sovereigns during his heyday, but that's over. When the Dawn ended, all the Infernals took a huge power drop, and the sovereigns are empowered by the firmament in the way that the world's locked together. So he's not strong enough in a straight-up fight, and the Infernals have abandoned him. He successfully led the conquest of Luminius, and then they all got their asses absolutely handed to them by these powerful dragons. So the coalition of the Infernals, it's all broken up. Every Infernal is out for themselves. And Uzul figures that if he can kill one of the sovereigns, that'll get him enough clout that he can start rallying the various fiends to his banner again. He can be at the head of a legion just like he likes. He can have everybody obeying him just like he likes. And they can start to take this world back and make it their own. But he's not strong enough to do it. So he decides to get tricky. And he starts to work with the fire giants. The giants, again, were created as shapers and caretakers of the world by the sovereigns. And the fire giants are the masters of forging weapons and metal and such. At the time, they're unsurpassed in all the world. And they dwell in great volcanoes, and they dwell in the underworld, and they're not evil. They're a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of tough, sort of uncaring, hot-tempered, but they're not evil. They're just focused on their work. And Uzul gets them to forge. He spins up some stories about possible threats to them, and he stokes the ego of the greatest of all the fire giants, sort of the titan of fire giants, the first fire giant, offspring of shaped by the sovereigns themselves. And he convinces her to make a sword from the iron of the earth's blood. I said a while ago that Ramius, the titan who's the son of Anacra, his job every time a new creature was born was to dip his silver ladle into the wells of blood and fill their veins with life. So there is this wellspring of life force, essentially, in the underworld. And it's metaphysical, it's magical, but it's also actual blood, meaning that it contains iron. And so Uzul convinced the fire giants to just process this raw life force blood and get the iron out of it, which took an immense amount of blood, and forge a huge sword, this masterfully crafted blade from the iron of the earth's blood. Then he steals it and stabs Anacra with it and kills her, which is not a thing anybody knew could happen. The sovereigns are the elements. They're as old as the world itself. So this was a traumatic shock that changed the entire history of Anacra, and it completely changed the way that the sovereigns saw the world and interacted with the world. Because at the time, again, Sin was playing civilization. He was starting civilizations. He was teaching mortals all sorts of things. Vindur was kind of helping the mortals. He never really trusted them. Liban would meddle with the mortals, walk amongst them, leave, do whatever they felt like. Then Anacra dies. Now, she didn't... Die isn't quite the right word, because if Anacra actually died, then the element of Earth itself would be dead, and basically it'd be a giant planet of dust or nothingness. But her ability to be a person, and to form, and to walk, and to talk, and to be something other than just Earth was destroyed. Her form was discorporated, and her will was dispersed into the earth itself, which shook the four kingdoms and shook the firmament that they were. The firmament of the four kingdoms locking together was cracked, and there were earthquakes throughout the land, and the skies darkened, and it was, again, it's one of the most important things that ever happened. And as a result of the death of Anacra, the fiends rallied to Uzul's banner again, and they surged out across the world. They feasted on the earth blood, and they just started taking over the mortal world. This leads to a period that I want to say it's 500-ish years, where the major power groups across the entire world of Anacra are beholden in some way to the Infernals. There are powerful, sophisticated, like our Roman Empire period in Anacra worshipped devils and demons, and they were cruel tyrants, and they were conquerors, and they were oppressors. And where you didn't have these powerful, stern empires, you had wild war bands that worshipped demons that would kill you and sacrifice you and raid your village. So it was a period of immense suffering, and there were a number of burgeoning civilizations at the time that would have flourished, and they already had arts and literature and all sorts of culture that just were completely overturned and destroyed. So the death of Anacra is so it's a period of about 500 years, and a huge amount of knowledge was lost, and the advancement of civilization stalled out, because the only people who had architecture and advanced magic and mathematics and chemistry and any of those sciences, that was almost all held in the hands of these horrible tyrants who would use any advantage whatsoever to hold on to that power. They built roads, they built temples, they built huge cities. Many of the ruins, if you're traveling throughout the northern kingdoms, for example, and you stumble upon a ruin, the odds are good that it's from one of the demonic imperiums. It's from this devil-worshipping, corrupt empire that built architectural wonders and killed a whole bunch of people on bloody altars. And that lasts, like I said, for about 500 years. And during that time, all the sovereigns lose it. The remaining sovereigns absolutely just have a very bad trauma reaction. Vindur goes from suspicious. Yes, many of the dungeons. So if you've watched Matt Colville's video about Lost Empires, which you should because it's great, one of the key themes of D&D is that there's all these ancient dungeons out there to loot. And in every region, you're going to have different cultures. And eventually, before we shut down the stream, we're going to wind back to the setting for Arc 3 of Casters and Castles. And one of the things I did for that setting for Otis Vale, which is enhance. So here's Galadron, and here's enhance. No, enhance. There we go. So here is Ziva's Lair and Artelane's Island. Let's turn off the grid so it's easier to see. So this all is where the first arc of Casters and Castles took place, and this is where they met the two-headed giant, and this is Dotun's Rock. This is Otisvale, which is where Arc 3 is going to take place. It's a setting I've been working on developing because I want Arc 3 of Casters and Castles, and I want Tales from the Golden Bough and other content to all be in this one area so characters can bump into each other and things that characters do can have consequences for other parties, you know, a shared setting of sort. But anyways, a long time ago, it was all ruled by this general of the Infernal Empire called Gomo. So Gomo's Gap is named after this essentially Roman general who served one of these infernal empires. But yes, to get back to your point, many of the dungeons that you'll loot, ancient lost temples and fortresses and stuff, they date back to the demonic Imperium. So they are very likely to be filled with magical items that were forged with the blood of innocents and therefore have evil properties. You're going to find altars to Uzul and Nephastus and Tillabek and Baalfagor and all the other great infernal lords. All sorts of nastiness, but also lots and lots of treasure. Yeah, I set the last campaign in Iman Karak. It was supposed to be this totally, where is it? It's supposed to be, hey, we're going to do something different. We're going to have this totally different culture. And then naturally, Bren was like, if the magical event originated in Dotun's Rock, we got to go to Dotun's Rock. Where were we? Right, the demonic Imperium. So for roughly 500 years, these demonic empires are they're fighting each other, they're fighting the elves, they're fighting the survivors. It's bad time. It's a dark age. A dark age with lots and lots of knowledge and sophistication in the hands of very, very cruel people. During this time, the other sovereigns absolutely lose their cool. Vindur goes from being this tough, you gotta earn it for yourself sort of father figure to mortals to saying, screw mortals, and he starts a conquest of the Sky Kingdom. He is terrified for his own self-preservation. He did not realize that sovereigns could be killed, or at least broken. What's up, Faggy? Nice to see you too. So Vindur reacts to Erikur's death by building this massive fortress in the clouds, the fortress of Terra Nimbus, which Tiberius Wandersafe saw during the last adventure. It was bad news. And he starts systematically conquering the Sky Kingdom, the lands, the clouds, basically. All these magical smoke swamps and rain, forests of rain, not rainforests, and otherworldly places with winged elves and bird people and cloud giants. He says, I can't handle this. I'm going to control everything so nothing can hurt me. And he becomes a tyrant and begins conquering the Sky Kingdom. And to this day, if you travel to the Sky Kingdom, you're going to encounter villages of Arakokra and birdfolk and other wondrous creatures that are either paying homage and fealty to Vindur or are living in fear that his knights are going to come conquer them at some point, because he will not handle it. Disadvantage on the storyteller. I need all the advantages I can get at this point, honestly. So Vindur loses his chill and starts conquering everything. He becomes a tyrant. And he says, humanity, mortals, not just humanity, mortals, not my problem. I'm going to control my backyard so nobody can stab me with a giant fuck-off sword made of blood iron. Sin, who was traveling the world, Sin always had this idea for what he wanted mortal civilization to be. He wanted them to aspire to be inventive and creative and ambitious. And the more advanced they became, the happier he was, because he saw the potential of mortals. And then we take those. Advantage and disadvantage and inspiration hereby cancel each other out. So Sin sort of starts to despair because everything's going to hell, somewhat literally. And then the great empire of Ioth. I'll zoom out here. The great empire of Ioth, which is down here, it was founded by elves shortly after the end of the dawn, because they were the again, they used to be these boundless beings and they were forced to choose forms for themselves, but they still remembered the dawn elves, the Alfar. They still remembered the lore of the time before Four Kingdoms. And so Ioth, this powerful archmage, wanted to teach humans and other mortals everything that he could. So he sort of gathered them together to learn at his feet and founded this great magical empire. And when the fiends swarmed over the land, Ioth, his empire, was one of the only holdouts because of his powerful magic. I kind of want to see a campaign where the party resurrects, reconstitutes the avatar of the Earth Sovereign. So this is a brief aside. Arakura's physical form, petrified, basically corpse, because again, her spirit just dissipates and fuses with all Earth everywhere. But the avatar that she was wearing is this petrified, it's now called Londakar, or the Crown. And it's this huge, massive rock formation in the western continent. And after Arakura was killed, giants traditionally lived in the Sky Kingdom. Almost all the giants lived up in the Sky Kingdom. But after Arakura was slain, because of their part in forging the blade that did it, Vindur banished he hurled all the fire giants from the sky to the mortal world below, kicked them all out. So they all landed, and they didn't think it was their fault, and they felt they were grieving their mother, and they were angry at Vindur, and when they arrived, giants in the sky with diamonds. And when they arrived, the dwarves had already inhabited. They'd taken Londokar, the remnants of the Earth Sovereign, and made it their home out of grief, and they also blamed the fire giants. And this started an enmity and a war that has lasted to this day. So a campaign where they try to reconstitute the avatar of the Earth Sovereign would probably take place in the West, in that, like, the heart of all dwarvendom, which is built in the corpse of their dead mother. But I digress. So all across the world, you've got demonic-ruled imperiums, and you've got holdouts, whether it's people hiding in the woods, up in the mountains, just trying not to be caught, or you've got these exceptional areas that for one reason or another are able to resist and go unconquered. So you've got the great magical empire of Ioth, you've got the sun worshippers of Brontha, and there's other places all across the world as well. The wood elves, the Kanach wood elves, go unconquered because they had their own. Their king is basically a god. They have a pact with the land, with the valley they live in, that infuses their king with the power of the four seasons and makes him a god. Ashley's character from the first campaign, Lysha Norwellen, is a Huldra from the Autumn Court. But anyways, Dark Age, demonic empires everywhere with holdouts, and then Ioth falls. This desert empire that was supposed to teach knowledge to mortals falls because of an internal civil war. So Vindur's an asshole now. Sin is watching everything he worked for corrupt, and it's sort of eating away at him, and he goes from wanting mortals to thrive and flourish and succeed to, fine, I'll do it myself. And Liban Liban tries. Liban actually mounts a resistance against the demonic Imperiums. The Liban forbids them from crossing the ocean, and there's no demonic empire or infernal empire of any kind that has any success with water-based travel or trade. The bigger the body of water, the worse it gets. Like, you can travel along a river, but they all basically believe that river travel is cursed or haunted or unlucky, and then infernals help them if they try to sail across a lake or the ocean, because the water itself rejects them. Liban rejects the minions of the people who killed their sister, and again, mounts somewhat of an effective resistance. This time period ends when Romius, the son of Anacra, the one responsible for, pouring blood into the veins of all new life, Romius spends the entire time that the Infernals are running rampant over the world studying creation and studying the four kingdoms and the firmament to get a good understanding of the laws of reality. And eventually he figures out how they work, and he modifies them. And this is referred to as Romius wrote his name on the emerald tablets upon which all law is inscribed. The emerald tablets are a symbol of the alchemical truths of matter and energy and transcendent reality. So Romius writes his name on the emerald tablets, and just like that, he changes the rules of Anacra. One, he promotes himself. So he goes from being like a pretty powerful titan to something just shy of the sovereigns. Two, he gives himself dominion over the underworld. At the time, before this happened, the underworld was the wellspring of the elements. It was basically, okay, the elements rise up from the underworld, it's the roots of the world, it's the spring that replenishes the world with the elemental force. And as things decay, they fall back into the underworld to sort of be processed and rise again. Romius turns the underworld from just the land of the elements to the land of the dead. And the other change he makes is that he banishes all fiends and infernals to the underworld. So before, you had demons and devils walking around in these cities, being worshipped as gods, running things, eating people, and then just like that, when Romius writes his name on those tablets, they are all physically dragged into the earth, screaming as their essence is stripped from their flesh, their bones are crushed into the ground, and they all get pulled into the underworld. So he turns the underworld into their prison and into the lands of the dead, because he needs armies to keep them at bay and keep them under control. All the infernals scatter, they all go running off and hide in the depths of the underworld, they all carve out miserable little domains for themselves, and Romius becomes the stern lord, the king of shadows, the ruler of the dead. So Romius is highly regarded by many across the entire world because he basically ended this period of horrible suffering and corruption overnight. Just all the fiends get banished. And when all the fiends get banished, the power structure of the demonic empire collapses. It takes a while. It's not like, oh, and tomorrow all these huge infrastructures are gone. But for a while, at least, the people who had demonic magic, warlock magic, etc., all their powers stop working while the fiends reconstitute themselves. The minions and summons that they were using to enforce their will are gone. And so you've got rebellions, you've got slave uprisings, you've got internal conflict as desperate generals and cruel emperors turn on each other trying to scramble for survival. So it is a huge period of war. It's like the fall of Rome in fast forward. So Romius ascends to this higher level of divinity, changes his whole nature, so now he's the stern lord. He sits on this marble throne beyond 5 rivers and adamant gates, and he's a huge figure in the underworld, and all the fiends are banished. And then over the next several hundred years, we eventually get to the modern era, where the adventures of Tiberius Wanderstave and so on and so forth occur. And it's after there was this period of intense horror, but also all the scientific and magical advances of that time are lost. Very poor record keep. There wasn't very good. They kept good records amongst themselves, but then their archives were burned by angry people who had been watching their children be sacrificed on bloody altars all this time. So they just torched and destroyed everything. So the world, it's not a total reboot. It's rebuilt by the survivors, by the exiles, but all the kingdoms. This ended. Let's check my timeline. This ended about 400 years ago was this period of time. So all the kingdoms that have emerged since then were either the holdouts, like the Wood Elves, who bunkered down in their magical valley of please fuck off, or they were descendants of rebels within these empires, or fleeing exiles from these empires, or the people who were hiding in the forests and the mountains trying not to get sacrificed, who suddenly pop out and start going nuts on their former oppressors. And so a lot of the civilizations are rebuilding from square one. And if they're not, like Brontha, for example, down here to the south, then they survived by being a zealous theocracy, where they were constantly vigilant against demonic influence or incursion, and very unrelenting in their worship of the sun god. So everyone who has survived has had to, and kept their civilization intact, had some secret sauce in order to do it. Oh, I was talking about the sovereigns, right. What do the sovereigns figure into all this? So sometime after that, let's see what happens first. So we have the apotheosis of Ramius. He banishes the infernals from the world. Changes all the rules. The problem, though, is that when Anacra was killed, the firmament that sealed Anacra away from the hungry dark was cracked. So after the four kingdoms were established, there were no more infernals arriving from the hungry dark, but the smell, with the damage done to the world by the death of Anacra, the smell of the earth blood leaked out into the hungry dark, into the vast cosmos, and something out there smelled it. That is exactly it. That's where we're going. That's it. The big meat is what's coming up next. The one flesh, which is this giant parasite drifting through the cosmos that smelled this delicious blood emanating through this crack in the firmament. And I like the big meat. I think the big meat's hilarious. And it smells it, and it comes drifting towards Anacra, and several hundred years later, actually how long? It's like 90 years later, it comes crashing down to the world. So the one flesh basically wriggles its way through the crack in the firmament and just starts plummeting, and it is going to burrow into Anacra and drink up that blood like a tick, and just drain the vital life from the world. And so Liban grabs a gigantic chunk of one of the continents, waits for the one flesh to get within range, and just swats it out of the air, crushes it into the ocean, squeezes it at the roots of the world, and then goes down there to beat the crap out of it until it stops fighting back. Which is why, so now Liban, who was this, like, I'm free, I'm water, I am liquid, I will not be constrained by anything, is now stuck at the bottom of this new continent, this fifth continent, locked in combat with this otherworldly horror for ever since then. And Phaedon Valensoth, Ash's character in the second arc of Castles and Castles, was a Triton whose people live near that fifth continent. And little bits and pieces of the one flesh are always breaking off and becoming horrific monsters, aberrations. Kraken, the Aboleth, the Mind Flayers, the Beholders, all sorts of bizarre otherworldly monsters. And so even though the one flesh is locked in combat with Liban, who really can't do anything because they're busy, the one flesh's spawn plague the world. And so the Tritons are constantly at war with these creatures. And when Tiberius Wanderstave came along and dropped the continental shelf on a kraken, that kraken was a particularly nasty spawn of the One Flesh. So that accounts for, who do we have? Anacra is dead. Vindur has gone full paranoid and is just conquering the Sky Kingdom. Liban is locked in battle with an eldritch horror at the roots of the world. Which leaves us with Sin. Sin Algawar. And Sin is the one who, he's the Prometheus figure. He loves mortals. He wants to teach them. He wants to see them thrive. And he watched them start to grow, start to cultivate, get dominated and corrupted by infernals. Then their civil war destroys Ioth, which was again one of their greatest accomplishments. And then the One Flesh descends and its mind starts warping the minds of mortals everywhere. And Sin has had enough. Sin literally pulls a fine, I will do it myself, gets sick of watching mortals flounder and fail and be corrupted. He gets angry. He gets, I don't want to say cold because he's a sovereign of fire, but he descends to the ruins of Ioth in this pillar of fire. And his arrival melts the desert, melts it into a sea of glass. And at its heart, he cracks down into the earth, and there's 7 great springs. Or is it 6? I think it might be 6. It's either 6 or 7. It's a significant number. There's these great springs that were buried beneath the earth. 6. We'll say 6. And so Sin says, I am going to drag mortals towards civilization, whether they like it or not. And he founds the fantastic civilization of Sharon. So Sin is actually, you can walk, like Liban's way over here under the water fighting things. Anacra is dead. Vindur is in his flying fortress. But if you go to Sharon, Sin is, I haven't placed the capital city yet, Sin is there. One of the 4 sovereigns is there. You can go into his throne room and meet him. It will probably not go well for you. But he's essentially a well-intentioned tyrant at this point. He rules over Sharon. It is now one of the most sophisticated cultures on the planet. In the world, rather. I don't know if it actually has the body of a planet. I don't think that's accurate. It has levels of mechanization. It's not full like steampunk level, but absolutely more sophisticated technology, advanced magic than anyone else. But the laws are very strict. Because it's like when you are playing The Sims and you don't let anybody do anything except what will achieve the maximum productivity towards their life. You say you will be happier if you do things my way all the time. And they will always be productive, and they will always be healthy, and you'll live the most amazing life, whether you like it or not. Does the One Flesh have a true name? That is a good question. Let's actually talk about true names a little bit, because that's an important aspect of lore. Like, you could gate it. That, if that is possible, that might have been more catastrophic than summoning a Shardalon, Dragon of the World before. I don't know if the One Flesh has a true name, because it's almost a colony as much as it's a single creature. And I guess we don't have to talk about true names, because the gate spell doesn't bind something to obey you, it just pulls it towards you if you know its name. I can't imagine the One Flesh is anything but Aku from Samurai Jack. When I think of the One Flesh, I am more thinking of the baddie from Chrono Trigger. I don't remember what it's called, but you know what I'm talking about, right? It's a giant space flea from nowhere. It's very much along the same lines. I imagine the One Flesh, instead of being a bunch of tentacles and eyeballs, it's proboscis like a mosquito has, and membranous wings and compound eyes. But yeah, I don't think you could summon the One Flesh because just of its bizarre nature. I think that if If Tiberius had tried to summon the One Flesh, something would have showed up. A very large piece of it would have shown up. And it would have been very bad. It would have been at least as bad. A giant Swedish meatball with a shambler face. Close enough. But yeah, a piece of it would have come through. A very large piece. It would have been at least as bad as summoning a Chardalon. Like, that would have been catastrophic. But it's the source of all your Lovecraftian, aberration, horror, alien-looking monsters. But yeah, that accounts for the Sovereigns. And where are they now? And as for the Titans, Romius is the Lord of Shadows in the Underworld, King of the Dead. Zalar is still the Sunrider, still, guiding or following the sun through the sky and inspiring zealous worship and eternal vigilance against evil. Raelta, the daughter of Vindur and Liban, after the One Flesh appeared, is when Raelta decided to... Raelta was not directly associated with the stars before the One Flesh arrived. But after the One Flesh arrived, Vindur was just, again, obsessed with protecting his own territory and his own neck. Raelta sort of broke out from under his thumb and started creating new stars. Because, again, the stars are watchers in the night against the hungry darkness, including things like the One Flesh. And so there's been a falling out between Raelta and her father. Raelta's other parent, Liban, has always been like, yeah, you do whatever you want. That's your thing. I don't care. But Vindur is very strict, controlling, and fearful, and the two do not see eye to eye. Now, feel free to hit me up with questions about any of that lore. That honestly is the largest, biggest strokes of the history of Anacra. That's like, if you need, what's the big picture? That's the big picture up until now. Those are the most important large cosmic scale events and conflicts that have defined the shape of the world from the beginning. How does Otisvale fit into this? Yes, a perfect transition. Thank you very much. So, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to talk about Otisvale in terms of its function for the channel and from a game design perspective. And then we will tie into some of its historical roots. So, the big things happening up until Tiberius Wandersave blew everything up. The big thing that was happening in the world is that the Kingdom of Galadron, which used to control all this territory, is at civil war because its line of kings died out. There's a few would-be people who claim they're related enough to be heirs, but there's some Game of Thrones stuff going on. Then Tiberius summoned a Chardalon, and we started Casters and Castles Cataclysm. That's now the other big thing happening in the middle of this war between these kingdoms, and the kingdoms are Galadron, Vercingetorix, which is where most of Arc 1 took place, and Laeteri. Laeteri is a league of, it's called the League of Chieftains, and originally it was formed from all these different tribes and cultures, sort of grouped together in a loose confederacy for mutual protection. They've been preyed upon by the creatures of the One Flesh coming up from the ocean, and they were all conquered by Magnan the Fierce and his descendants who founded Galadron. So, Otisvale is about the size of England. I ran the math on this, actually. I did some medieval demographics, and it's got a population in the millions, which I did not envision at all. But I looked back at like 10th century England, plus a certain amount of magic. I did some math on it, and multiple million inhabitants in an area the size, like 200 by 300 miles or so, which again is the area of England in medieval times, is not out of the question. So it's a very populated, fertile valley, and it is caught between the three kingdoms of Galadron, Vercingetorix, and Laeteri. So one of the big plot threads we have going on is, where will its loyalties lie? Who will everyone side with? And there's all sorts inside of Otisvale. There are people who are loyal, who say, oh, Galadron, live or die. There's people who say, Galdron has been assholes to us. We're finally ready to, throw in our lots with Vercingetorix or whoever. So there's different people in Otisvale. I ran. I can show my work at some point. I'll pull up the article that I was using to generate those numbers. I thought that was a massive number as well, but apparently it checks out historically. The thing is, in medieval times, unless there was a goddamn good reason, every single piece of arable land would be farmed. And when you run the math on how much arable land is in Otisvale, because it's mostly fertile land, like it actually was on you can get into the multi-millions and be on the low end of things, which is wild. You just have to have a few cities of sufficient size. And when you throw in the fact that magic allows an even higher standard of living and more density and such, again, it's not like it's high-rise apartments everywhere you go, but anywhere you travel in Otisvale, unless it's been raided and destroyed, you're not going to go over a beautiful, fertile, green plain or rolling hill without a farmer there. If people can eat, they will eat. They will make food there somehow. So, Otisvale is caught between these three kingdoms, and Ashardalon was on his way from Dotun's Rock to wreak havoc on it. But a couple episodes of Tales from the Golden Bough ago, we had Sabriel, Parallax, and Thibaldork on, and together they enacted a ritual that, using dawn magic, and they worded it very cleverly in such a way that blocked Ashardalon from entering the valley. I'll be honest, I had not planned that. I had planned for the capital city of Romar to get wiped out, or at least, no, to get heavily damaged, and the Duke of Romar to be killed, and all sorts of other political fallout. But I like the idea of a living world. I like the idea of not railroading when interesting things happen. Yeah, they enacted a ritual, and they worded it carefully, so they blocked Ashardalon. For how long? That's a great question. But now what's going to happen is word is going to spread in this land, and this is going to, we'll see, we'll probably set the next campaign a month, maybe, after the next one. But they enacted this ritual, so now suddenly, out of all this area of Vercingetorix that is subject to Ashardalon's depredations, there's this area that is safe. And that is going to create a huge amount of pressure here. Because this is going to be, not only is it already fertile farmland, not only is it caught between the great city of Daegol and the Lytari League of Chieftains, you've got the Galadron loyalists who want it to declare to the greatest noble families of Galadron. You've got the people of Vercingetorix who want its loyalty. You've got the mysterious elves of Nenri who were at war with Mika's character in the last campaign. And they are renowned enchanters with their own agenda for mortals. So, Otisvale suddenly becomes a very important place. Welcome, Flint and Steel. We will post a VOD of this, or maybe just an easy summary. I might write up a summary so people can just read a TLDR. Yes, so the original plot was going to be that we have a new party of adventurers, and we've already been talking about sort of what characters they want to play. But the Duke of Romar was going to be killed by Ashardalon, leaving like the Council of Romar to pick up the pieces. You've got all these different powerful castles and cities around there, and nobles who all have their own thoughts about who they want to swear loyalty to. So it's this cooking pot of valuable resources and people with agendas. Meanwhile, as all this is happening, there's other forces at work. Again, the elves of Nenri, they have a beautiful city built on top of a lake, rising from this lake. But they have a reputation. Their woods have a reputation for being enchanted, and they have a reputation for placing humans under spells for their own good. So the elves of Nenri have promised help, if only people will obey them. You've got different people in the city of Romar who want different things. I'm going to at least create a background of political turmoil. Whether or not the various parties want to engage with it is, and oh yeah, subterfuge. So what I'm doing, also by the way, Gomo's Gap is named after an infernal general, so there are infernal ruins around here. But this place also had its own civilizations and cultures before the infernal crisis. So as people explore Oda's Vale, they're going to discover all sorts of different archaeological layers and cultures and magic items and stuff like that. So here is the plan. Romar, the city of Romar, I am working on it right now. I've already created a bunch of NPCs. I'm creating places and temples and taverns and merchants and stuff like that. And it is going to be the hub of the next set of adventures. If you are a subscriber and you have submitted an NPC that you want to create, the odds are good they are going to live in Romar or nearby Romar. Because Romar, again, is where the Duke and Duchess of Romar have to decide, they have to play very carefully who are they going to affiliate with. Because they have this huge advantage of a Chardalon can't kill us, and this huge disadvantage of everybody wants control of our territory. And meanwhile, out in the town, there's like the owner of the tavern sings songs of the bravery of Lyteri, and the general, Adel the Younger, who's recently, he actually sent our last Golden Bough adventure, took place right here, where our heroes went after some gnolls. They found evidence that gnolls were raiding a nearby encampment, and gnolls have infernal, fiendish links. So there's other trouble afoot in the valley. They were sent by Adel the Younger, who's a knight with ties to the kingdom of Vercinget, and he's an angry, sort of proud, disciplined young man with his own ideas about the direction that the valley should take. So I want all future Golden Bough adventures to take place for the foreseeable future here. And as adventures take place, it's going to modify, it's going to change the shape of what happens. Whether those adventures are Tales from the Golden Bough, or the main story campaign, or other things I would like to do with people during the next arc of the story, of the campaign. I could still kill off the Duke. I do like the idea of the town council sort of having to make their choice, or I could start it with an assassin killing the Duke. So there's this whole whodunit. And the great thing about this, the gnolls were extremely slain by Earth Spikes. That spell is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So the idea here is that there will be all sorts of things going on. We've got monsters, we've got monster incursions, we've got refugees from a Chardalon, we've got mysteries in the forests, we've got bandits. Most bandits in medieval times were just nobles who had nothing better to do, robbing people. So we've got all these nobles in the area who have things people want. We've got lost magical libraries. We've got rebels. We've got infernal cults. We've got the mysteries of the dusk elves. So there's two main types of elves, the dawn elves or high elves and the dusk elves or wood elves. And they dwell nearby. Elmspire, where Bennis Rambletoon hails. It was recently destroyed. Elmspire's down here. So we've got the mysteries of the wood elves, we've got the enchantments of the high elves, the dawn elves, we've got the gnolls and monsters of the Flynwood Forest, we've got bandits and highway folk prowling up and down, we've got scheming nobles both outside and inside, all plotting for control of the valley. and so I'm going to create this environment and detail it out as much as possible. And that's the exact idea. So if you are a subscriber who is not playing in the campaign, I've alluded before that I would like to give more community and audience participation. And I'd like, if we can get this living setting going, I'd like to give the community the ability to vote on key issues that will decide the course of Romar's fate. And the whole goal of this, a lot of DMs, when you create something, you have to ask yourself the question, who is this for? And a lot of times I have tried to build things that I'm really excited about that my players don't really care about. They have personal stories they want to chase, they want to do quests, they don't care about the scheming nobles and politics and subterfuge. So the goal here is to create this environment that feels alive, that has all these things happening, consequences both of the background lore we've been talking about tonight and of the campaign. We've got Tiberius' stuff that he did. We've got the Tales from the Golden Bough episodes that are changing the story. So the idea is to create this mixing pot of all these elements that reacts and evolves. Then during stories, people can decide, like, again, Bren and Sideshow and whoever we have in the next arc of the story, if Ash is along with it, they might decide, hey, we work for this noble and we're going to take this job. We care about who runs things. Or they could just get a job. We don't care. We're here for hire. They take whatever job they want. And so you, the community, will be able to sort of watch and say, oh, shit, they took a job from the Lyteri loyalists that is advancing their agenda. Now this is going to happen. And that might come back to bite our main party, or they could just go on chasing the next monster, doing the next thing they do, but that action will have ramifications for the other adventures taking place in the valley. I've been working on this for a while. I've been trying to tie in all these different elements. I don't know exactly what the schedule is going to be going forward, but the goal is to create this living setting. And by restraining it to this specific, it's a large area. It is a big area. Every hex is a 12-mile hex. So this isn't a small territory. But the idea is if we focus on the city of Romar and the people who live there, and then we add adventure spreading out, almost like a West Marches Light style campaign, and we stretch out. So in the subs only section of our Discord server, there is, I think it's stickied. I'll make sure it's stickied. Yes, it is pinned. So there is a pinned form you can use to submit a character. And I've collected all the submissions so far, and I've been working on them. I just haven't had the opportunity to announce or post them. So what I'm going to do, I've been posting these World Anvil articles about the big cosmic yada yada of the world. The next phase of lore updates is really going to focus on this area of Otis Vale. The history, the inhabitants, the structures, the settlements, all that stuff. And that is the first place that subscriber created characters are going to appear. And then just like the quest giver yesterday was a character who is in Romar, who I already created, as more adventures take place here, subscriber created characters might start showing up. They might, if you created a merchant, they might be the person that a party member goes to. They might be offering their services as mercenaries, so on and so forth. Is the one character per sub rule still in effect? So you can feel free to submit multiple characters if you want. What is likely to happen is that it's going to be sort of a first come, first serve. So if I'm adding somebody into the world, I'm going to prioritize somebody whose character hasn't been, like if you've got 5 people you've submitted and someone else has 1 and I've made one of yours and I haven't made one of theirs, they're going to come first. So I will aim to definitely deliver 1. If you put in more, we'll see. What will likely happen is as I add details, so I need to create an article about Otis Vale. I've been fleshing it out, so I'm going to create that, and then I can create an article about the city of Romar and place it there. And once I've got that, then I can start saying, okay, this person's article is here, and this person's article is here. And as I do that part, I'm probably going to reach out and say, hey, questions for you. You put this in your lore. This is how it would work in Anacra. What do you want about this? What do you want about that? I have no idea the pace of progress that is going to. I want to set expectations. This is my goal. And I think during travel next year, I will have a fair amount of time to work on it. But I'm not setting a time horizon right now just because I don't know the amount of work that's going to be involved. And I don't know how many games we're going to be able to play based on the schedule. I think soon people are starting to come back from break. They're starting to get back to work. It'll be easier to have these conversations and set things up. I think soon we'll have a better idea of what the show schedule is going to be like, because the show schedule is going to be where a lot of this stuff comes to life. I can work on stuff in the background and throw things on a wiki all I want, but I feel like it doesn't really come to life until we do something with it. Will you also be making articles on the 3 Kingdoms, or did you already do that and I missed it on World Anvil? Let me check, because I think that's important. I'm positive I don't have an article about Lyteri or Vercingetorix public. I might have one about Galadron. There might be a public article about Galadron. Let me see real quick. If there is, I will post it. Nations and factions. That is going to be a no. That is going to be a hard no. I also should link them all together, so you could basically click through the articles and just click next to sort of go from top to the bottom. So I have a Galjon article. I've written a lot in it. That might be, I think, probably the smartest thing to do is to work from the outside in, do the kingdoms, Otisvale, Romar, go from there. But I've been like taking notes and sketching things out this whole time, so a lot of the groundwork is in. It just needs to look pretty. It needs to be written up. Right now, for sure, on World Anvil, we have the 4 kingdoms, the 4 major planes of existence. We now have the 4 elemental sovereigns. That's been the most recent project, since they're some of the biggest, most important deities. Everything else is in there sort of slapdash. I've got articles about humans, elves, and dwarves. But I definitely think the kingdoms are next, and then work our way in. But yeah, the idea is that rather than doing a bunch of world tour, like we went to Amonkharok, which is a totally different culture, I think it's really cool, but I think we'll get more mileage out of staying in a small area. I think that pretty much covers most of the stuff I was going to talk about. There is more history and lore to Otisvale. Bendis is nearby, so Tiberius probably traveled through Otisvale at some point and would be known in the area. There is a statue of Tiberius Wanderstave in the city of Romar. So that's a yes. It's a note that I have added. I have some note. I don't remember off the top of my head what deed he performed there, but there is a statue of Tiberius Wanderstave. At some point, I think one of the next, we have maps on World Anvil that like let you track the adventures of everybody. I think at some point it might be fun to do the life and times of Tiberius Wanderstave that sort of shows his life story and all the places he's gone and all the stuff he's done. But that's more of a fun thing. We'll see if we get to that. Will the cast be rotating based on people's schedules, or is the plan to fill in with Golden Bough, Descent into Avernus when the main CNC campaign has scheduling issues? So, since some of the Owl Talent announcements were made, because Josh and Bren will be casting Overwatch League matches, the travel schedule is prodigious and erratic. We are still waiting to get all of that information to have a conversation about what will be the official main show schedule. Descent into Avernus is not even set in Anacra at all. That was just supposed to be a campaign I did with like my earliest buddies. And I just told the folks, hey, I'm running this game. I could stream it on the channel. That might be fun. And the rest of the cast of casters and castles said, yeah, sure, that's fine. Throw it up there. So that really exists in its own world. The only reason we were doing that on Tuesdays was because we were on hiatus for the main show. And it's going to be better not to do it on Tuesdays because, like, it's all dads. There's 2 dads in that group and some people on the East Coast. And Tuesday nights in this time block is brutal on them. So, Descent into Avernus, the likely plan is that is going to become crazy erratic. It's probably going to be like weekends at normal human hours. I think I should still be able to keep doing Tuesdays, and once we announce, we're gonna figure out the scale of the next main arc with the core cast. My vision for Tales from the Golden Bough, I'd like to continue to bring on new rotating guest cast members. But I would also like to bring some people back so that their characters can all sort of be based out of Romar and go on adventures. I think a lot of those characters were really fun. And I think instead of doing completely new people every single time, we can get a little more character development and such by bringing on some old faces. And I think we can probably use that to patch, like a Tales from the Golden Bough episode, to patch gaps in the main schedule instead of Descent into Avernus. We want to keep doing Descent into Avernus. I'm having a blast with that game. It's a huge amount of fun. Running a pre-made module is amazing in terms of just like how little work it is, but how much fun we can still have with it. But I have no idea what the schedule on that one is going to be. Yeah, you're East Coast. Sean is in like overseas, so it's ungodly gamer hours right now. That's another thing. I feel like for the Tuesday night block, depending on when the Owl talent is available, that Tuesday may not work for them. But there are other degenerate gamers who we've had on the show before, other esports folks who might be available to do recurring stuff on Tuesdays. So we'll see. So what's funny is that Darius, Ninja Man Matt, he is my friend for years and years and years. He is one of the main co-creators of Anacra with me. He has, like, some parts of the world are kind of his, in a way. We've been working together on this world for years. But every single time we play any game whatsoever, any board game, anything, he does not care about winning. All he cares about is me losing and me having a bad time. So the fact that chat decided to just blast him every single time he shows up is one of the most amazing and poetic things that I am grateful for in my life. Oh, good Lord. So, welcome, by the way. We are doing well today. You have slightly unfortunate timing because I have a train to catch. So, we're not done. We're not done here yet, but I want to give myself plenty of time to catch that train. So let me check on the schedule. I have at least 15 more minutes. And like I said, I pretty much we honestly covered. One of my goals with Anacra is that I want every area to have its own rich history. I want every area to have its own archaeological history. So you're going to have different ruins and different faiths and different traditions and mysteries in every region. I want every area to feel very different. But what we covered during today's stream is sort of a soup to nuts of, again, the biggest cosmic events that have defined Anacra's history. So we actually got a fair amount done. Thank you for the subscription. Much appreciated. If we build up to an act of God, we are going to inflict it on somebody. Someone's going to get hit with the act of God. Even if it's we start Arc 3, welcome everyone, introduce all the characters, immediate act of God. We're going to do it. So I work in LA and I live in San Diego. So it is, I stay a few nights a week, a few days a week at the Owl site, and then the rest of the time I'm home with my wife in San Diego. I crash at my coworkers' places. I do not sleep there, or I don't commute every single day. That would be horrible, basically. All right, let's see if I can. I don't think I actually bought my train ticket. I think the train leaves in an hour. So in 15 minutes, I want to pack up so I can get to the station so I can make sure I'm on time. I appreciate you coming by. Thank you for the sub. Glad to have you. I know it's an odd hour, and thanks for coming by. Is the Act of God tier system still the plan? Yes. Yes. We've had a lot of fun with the Act of God. We're continuing to tweak with it and poke it. And like we're experimenting with the channel points system, for example, in Descent into Avernus. I don't know how the channel point system is going to work during the big streams, just because that can scale up to an outrageous point. But we'll keep doing it for Descent into Avernus and Tales from the Golden Bough. But the Act of God system is in place for those as well. Excited should have put a coach in his office for you. That's actually one of the issues with this gap when Brand and Sideshow were overseas is because I don't live here. I don't have I can't film from my house, right? I can't have everybody over with all the tables and all the cameras and stuff from my house because I'm bumming off of other people's houses and places the whole time. So that has made it difficult to do in-person shows. We tried to get a couple together with some folks, but between schedule conflicts and venue availability, we've had to stick mostly with online during the break. Thank you for sticking with us. I know most folks who started watching this channel, they wanted to see Brendan Sideshow play D&D, and I'm super excited and grateful that I've been able to take the lead of a lot of this project. I'm eager for them to get back. I've had a ton of fun playing with them. They're some of the best personalities and people to have at the table. But I also got a lot of creative control, and I've taken it and run with it, and I hope to keep everybody entertained regardless of what our schedule may have in store for us. And we're working on sub-emotes. I mentioned this earlier in the stream. My former artist, a good friend of mine, had to take a step back from doing art, so the commissions that I had in his inbox are now in the hands of another artist. No hard feelings. It was totally understandable. We are now starting to work with another artist. We will hopefully have some cool emotes for you. I submitted an emote of me making a weird face. I haven't checked to see if it got rejected or if it just is in limbo. So if nothing else, we'll try to get an emote of me making a weird face. I'd like to see what else I can do and we can do as a group with the channel during odd hours and during times of schedule chaos. I think more one-shots would be fun. And I think that trying to bring people back who have been on Tales from the Golden Bough is going to be a really good way to patch that out, so that we can still have an ongoing, on-running narrative, even if it's scattered all over the place. But as soon as we have an announcement to make about Arc 3's schedule, we will get that on Discord and on Twitter, so that everyone can be on the same page. I got about 10 minutes left. If anyone in chat has any questions, hit me. I have run my mouth and said all the running my mouth things that I wanted to. Like Golden Bough routinely runs overtime. Yeah. I think that I might have stayed on target for Golden Bough once or twice. It's not that big of a deal when it runs overtime, except for the sanity of my guest stars and my own schedule. It's more that when you run a one-shot, the tricky thing about running a one-shot is that you have to create a satisfying and interesting experience and get it all done at once. You have to establish, like, you have no time for setup, right? You have to get all your setup and your dramatic conclusion all in there. You need to make sure that there's some exploring, some fighting, some role play, the whole D&D experience. And combat just takes forever, even if you get really good at it. And because we've had so many newbies, combat always takes forever. So it is a challenge getting it down to that 3-hour time block. It's been a blast, though. We've had some great groups. The thing is, though, if I can get it set up and scheduled with the right people, it's finding a 3-hour block is doable. It's definitely doable. Thank you, NWC Tim. I don't remember if I am doing the first homestand or not. I was supposed to be in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Hangzhou for the first for weeks 2 through 4, but I'm not. Yeah. So my schedule's a little bit exciting right now. But if we are in San Francisco, we'll definitely say hi. I would love to do some casters and castles on the road. That would be a blast. It is difficult to fit in with everything else going on. Describe Romar. So Romar is built on the river. So the river, now that it's not a smoldering pile of rubble. So the rivers in Otisvale generally flow north to south. You've got all these mountains up here, and generally speaking, the valley slopes down this way, and they all pool into the great lake that the elven city of Nenri is built upon. And the river flows from Elmspire and a couple of other mountains. So generally speaking, Otisvale, you have these fertile green fields and hills with these big rivers that all flow through. Romar is built near a place in the river where it's built on a hill, but it is surrounded by some of the best farmland. And it's defined by the river sort of is its lifeblood. And there's a couple of, like, what you have on the west side of the river versus the east side of the river is going to be very different. And in the middle, the river sort of breaks around an island. There's an island in the middle of the river that's just sort of been worn down by erosion over the years. That is where the Duke's Castle is built. Normally, you wouldn't build a fortification in the sort of low ground area like Romar is. You would always build on the highest point that you can find. But the fact that you have this nice large stone rock in the middle of the river makes it a great place to fortify. You have access to clean water. It's very easy to pull up the bridges so no one can get to you, so on and so forth. So you've got this large river breaking around this rock, bridges that go to either side. Up there's a large hill where some ruins of the ancient infernal strongholds and like civilization can be found, and some of the old manor houses and like fancy mansions have now become an indoor market. And so the bottom levels, it was temples and stuff, and those old stones have been rebuilt, and you have this large indoor market. And in the upper floors are where you have the headquarters of the guilds, the various guilds that ply their trades in Romar. There's a very important mill, and there's a huge, you've got the upper market, which is that indoors market, and then you've got the lower market, which is where a lot more of the folks just come in and ply their trade. Yeah, it's a natural moat, exactly. They've got their own built-in moat, which is why it has remained popular over the years. If I recall correctly, I'll pull up my notes for the last few minutes. I've been typing a lot. It's not on the anvil yet because I need to formulate it first, and then I'll hash it all out. The site has been inhabited since before the Demonic Imperium. Anywhere you have fertile farmland, you're going to have people living there, right? The moment they know how to farm, they're going to be there. Setting. City of Romar. So, like I said, it was the site of General Gomo when the Demonic Empire fell and the fiends were dragged back into the underworld. Gomo was a important general of the predominant empire, and he gathered all the survivors that he could, and he fled from the downfall, and he pushed his way into Otisvale and made that his holdout. So even after the Demonic Empires fell, for a long time, there was this desperate former infernal worshippers sort of holding out inside there. And he waged war against the Alfar elves to the south, and against like the local different tribes and folks who had been hiding in the forests, until eventually, years later, one of Magnan, who founded Galadron, her name was Clothild, and she led an army, and she swept up, like, it had devolved from this militaristic holdout down to just we're kind of clinging to the ruins. So she comes in, sweeps everyone out, becomes the Duke, vanishes into the southern woods, but her daughter Oda becomes the Duchess. And so Otisvale is named after her. She sets up, there was already ruined fortifications on this natural moat island. She sets up there. And then a statue of Tiberius is erected in town for his contributions. Yeah, and because it is sort of the first stop along the river, right? You could go all the way down here to this city, which I haven't named yet, where the rivers meet. But the thing is that Romar is the biggest city that is directly on this major river, which I have named, wrote it down, don't know where I wrote it. It's somewhere in my notes. But this major river is a huge trade hub up and down all of Otisvale. And that puts Romar as the biggest, most defensible city along this route in a position of supreme economic and military power. So there are docks. There's a lot of riverboats going up and down. There's a major tannery downstream, which just smells awful. So people who live upstream are high class. People who live downstream tend to be rougher around the edges. They have a nastier experience living. There's a few different factions, and they all have like hangouts where they go, and a few members of the town council. I will save that for another day, because like I said, does it have a sewage system? I don't believe so. I will double check my notes. They might have an old sewer. It depends on how sophisticated the old Infernal Empire city got. I'll look at my notes. If they have a sewer system, it's not sophisticated. It's probably, they didn't build it, it was already there, and they sort of just started using it again, and it's not properly maintained, but it's better than nothing. I imagine a lot of their refuse gets dumped into the river. So again, upstream versus downstream is a huge, huge issue. Yeah, it wasn't, I need to determine how big and important that city was, but it was held by that. Which means that the dungeon under the castle is slightly haunted. Mo DeGeneres, thank you for the subscription. I am sorry that you've come in right when we're about to leave, but I appreciate the support. We will keep hitting you with more content, more streams, more games, and emotes coming down the pipe. All right, folks, that is going to do it for me. I need to pack up all my toys and make sure I get to the train station, assuming that the trains are still running. Apparently there's been a brush fire. I just looked up NWC Tim and saw that you were talking about an April 1st episode. That could be fun. How do you do April Fools with this party? Like, it's already a constant clown fiesta. See if there's any service notifications on the train. If the trains are screwed, then I can hang out a little bit longer. If the trains are not screwed, I am out of here. That would be fun. Oh, that'd be fun. That'd be hilarious. Okay, there are no warnings on it. So it is time for me, 4 DMs. I have no idea how that would work. It's a good idea for a, make sandcastles, of course. Literally make sandcastles. What was I going to look up? Oh yeah, I was going to see if anybody is streaming. Well, Critical Role is streaming. Chat, is there anybody live right now who we should raid? I like to find little channels that are doing D&D stuff and just surprise them with some viewers so people can check them out. But if any of our friends from the esports community are live right now, I'm logged in on the Casters and Castles account, so I can't see all my normal follows. So if you have any suggestions on who we can raid, otherwise I'm going to look around and see who we want to drop in on. I'm not going to raid Critical Role. They have 18,000 viewers. Like, that ain't happening. What if Custa's live? He was streaming earlier. He is hosting Jake. Let's see. Scraticus. I like Scraticus. Scraticus Academy. They're interesting. They're good people. You can always just pop in and say hi. Alright, chat. Barring any suggestions, we are going to raid Straticus. Scraticus. Where are they? Yes. Well, those are all fantastic channels. All right. We're going to raid Straticus. They're doing Hyper RPG, which I don't know a whole lot about, but we'll go ahead and hit them up. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. We will endeavor to bring live actual play next Tuesday. Jury's still out. Got to talk to everybody, but we'll have a show of some sort. And then I think we have Descent into Avernus on Saturday, this coming Saturday. I will double check. I want to make sure we're not running up against Overwatch League. Do not bite the hand that feeds you. But either way, thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for the support, the subscriptions, the continued interest. It keeps me excited about doing this. Take it easy.